We have a question for the panel. Of the QMS considerations presented earlier, what elements may be especially challenging or costly for industry, and how can the FDA mitigate without sacrificing data quality or integrity? Dr. Capanazza, do you want to start
Yeah.
us on the response?
Yeah, I want to mention this issue when it comes to IVPT method sensitivity and selectivity. We are really in trouble. Historically, IVPT has been proved to be very sensitive, not to formulation specifics. Practically, there are not too many options to sensitize the method. Just try different surfactants to solubilize, analyze. That's all. Since aciclovir cream PSG 5 years, many of IVPT method proves this to be the sensitive. And we all know that tissue sources is a pressure. We are concentrated on the 6-9 donors to obtain TR ratio for in a pilot studies run to calculate the sample size calculation. Normally, there is no spot to those samples for sensitivity and selectivity on the same donor and run in parallel. Instead, we need to kind of another pilot scale run because statistical assessment is required for sensitivity and selectivity. As we all know, statistician is never enough donors or replicates to conduct a comparison. Understood, variability could be too high and need some sufficient data to be collected. So instead of covering statistical assessment, could we have a more liberal approach? Let's say 3 donors, 3 replicates, displayed like data like flux, the cumulative amount as a graph, and illustrate sensitivity and selectivity. Dr. Renee or Kiran, Priyanka?
I can try to address.
Okay, go ahead, Priyanka. Yeah.
I can try to address, Theo. I don't know if I misunderstood your question, but my interpretation was you mentioned that there are statistical requirements for the sensitivity and the selectivity studies for IVPT, and there are some concerns because the numbers of donors and replicates are relatively small. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is correct. Yeah.
Okay. So I think we discussed quite extensively during Hiren's session, the session Hiren was moderating, as well as the session that I was moderating on the first day of the workshop, that we appreciate that the pilot studies or the studies where sensitivity and selectivity is being assessed for an IVPT are not powered for to meet statistical endpoints. And we did ask for feedback from everyone, including the statisticians on the group, on how do we look at these small data sets and what kind of endpoints can we look at to assess sensitivity and selectivity of the studies without having the need to meet like statistical criteria. I understand that your proposal would be to plot the data as cumulative amount as well as flux, and perhaps to look at within donor if the test reference and the alternate formulations are behaving similarly. I think that would be a good starting point, but in general, we don't expect the sensitivity and the selectivity studies to meet a statistical endpoint or criteria. I'm not sure if there was a confusion on Wednesday.
Just to add one thing, especially when you're working with the selectivity, you are having a parallel assessment of a taste reference and an alter formulation, which is meant to have a different formulation profile than the reference product. Now, there will be a situation, again, there was it was mentioned in the draft PSC of acyclovir cream. We completely acknowledge that, because of the low power study, you not necessarily meet the statistical criteria. Now, there may be a situation if you are just relying on the endpoint for the alter formulation, you might have the same AUC as well as Jmax, but when you look at the profile, it will be totally different. So, that's why what we discussed on the day one, that if you look at the flux profile as well as cumulative profile in a qualitative manner, and if you see the good separation by considering all your replicates between, the expectation for the selectivity, taste, and reference should behave very similarly compared to alter formulation. So if you, for example, if you have a Tmax around, again, Tmax is not a parameter, but I'm just giving you the example. Tmax is somewhere around 10 to 15 hours for taste and reference product within that donor. But when you go for look at your alter formulation, you are looking at Tmax around 48 hours, for a 72-hour study. So there is a qualitative discrimination, even though you are having the same Jmax and AUC or AMT, you end up having a different qualitative permeation profile. So that is, in my opinion, sufficient to say that your method is selective. But if you're just going with the endpoint, you might run into a trouble to distinguish those those parameters.